you all for being here. I'm pleased to be surrounded, several members are coming from the House and the Senate, but we wanted to start, by several Democratic colleagues who have joined me in opposing the Biden administration's newly announced asylum bans. Today, we sent a letter signed by nearly 80 members of Congress from both chambers, which express our concern that President Biden is reversing his promise to restore access to asylum at our southern border. Our letter, which was co-led in the Senate by Senators Booker, Lujan, and Padilla, and in the House by Representatives Ocasio-Cortez, Grijalva, and Casar, condemns the administration's expansion of Title 42. And it urges the president to reconsider his decision to create a new transit ban. Now, we recognize that the United States is experiencing a difficult migration challenge at the southern border. We recognize that President Trump made a top priority to dismantle border and asylum processing as we know it. But as elected officials, we are duty-bound to propose legal solutions, one that protects asylum seekers while also securing the safe removal of migrants who have no legal claim to stay in the United States. Now, anyone who tells you that the only way to secure our border is to punish asylum seekers is lying. It's why we are appalled to see President Biden replicate President Trump's immigration strategy. The right to seek asylum is enshrined in both international and domestic law. These laws were passed by Congress after our immigration system shamefully failed to protect Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. They were passed so that the United States of America would always shine as a beacon of hope for a newly arrived immigrant. After all, the words etched on the Statue of Liberty do not read, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," just so that we can turn them around and send them back to where they came. I want to be clear. The Biden administration's announcement expanding Title 42, and by the way, Title 42 is not a solution. It is part of the problem. It is a revolving door. It has no final adjudication of those who may have a right for asylum and those who may not have a right for asylum. And so when we see the numbers at the border, part of it is that we have this revolving door of people who try to come in, get automatically pushed back as a result of Title 42, and then they take another shot at it. There's no finality to it. Makes no sense. While also issuing a new transit ban on asylum seekers runs completely contrary to this creed. As a matter of fact, it runs completely contrary to what then Vice President Biden, and before that Senate Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee Biden, said about the question of asylum. As he grapples with the ongoing legal battle to end Title 42, the Biden administration cannot have it both ways. They cannot acknowledge that seeking asylum is a legal right. They cannot indicate that they then want to expand legal pathways and secure our border, only to expand this disastrous Trump-era relic that only benefits human smugglers. The administration also cannot have it both ways when they claim to be committed to restoring access to asylum, and then they callously block access to asylum, imposing a transit ban policy that forces migrants to first seek humanitarian protection in a third country. 3 years ago, when President Biden promised to dismantle President Trump's asylum bans, he said, and I quote, "This is the first time ever you've had to seek asylum in a third country. It's outrageous. It's outrageous, and it's wrong." Close quote. Those were the words of then candidate Biden. Today, we ask the president to recommit to his values, because no matter how many Trump policies the Biden administration resurrects, Republicans will continue to obstruct any effort to actually reform our border processing and modernize our immigration system. They need immigration to stay in the headlines. Why? Because it's the red meat that they use to rile up their base. Now, I refuse to play that game. I've worked my entire career, more than 30 years in Congress, trying to forge a bipartisan agreement that secures our borders, provides legal pathways to citizenship. It's what we did in 2013 with the Gang of Eight. We can do that if there are people of goodwill and a desire to move forward. That's why I urge the president not to go through with his transit ban rule and continue the fight to end Title 42 in the courts and work with Congress, not against us, to finally dedicate the resources we need to get a handle on our mass migration challenge once and for all. Right now, the Biden administration has two options. It can continue playing into the hands of extreme anti-immigrant leaders, individuals who will only be satisfied when they end the asylum system as we know it. Or they can return to their original plan of speeding up cases for asylum seekers, eliminating the immigration court backlog, addressing the root causes of immigration, and efficiently and legitimately removing people who have no legal claim to stay in the United States. The ball is now in their court. Before I turn it over to my colleague, this is a bicameral effort. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, let me just say a very few brief words in Spanish. Estamos aquí hoy reunidos, miembros de la Cámara y del Senado, conjunto, para mandar un mensaje bien claro al presidente Biden y su administración. Tu política inmigratoria de desmantelar el proceso de asilo en los Estados Unidos no es aceptable y no es legal. El presidente Biden, cuando fue candidato, dijo bien claro, el tener que conseguir asilo en un tercer país antes de venir a los Estados Unidos es ilegal y inmoral. Y estoy de acuerdo con esas palabras, es ilegal y inmoral. Y por eso la nueva política de la administración Biden, que continúa en varios sentidos la política del presidente Trump, es absolutamente no aceptable. La realidad es que el título 42 no es una solución al tema migratorio, es parte del problema. Crea una puerta que da vuelta y vuelta y vuelta, pero sin finalidad. Una persona entra, está expulsada por el título 42, entra de nuevo, expulsada por el título 42, entra de nuevo, expulsada por el título 42. Eso no es solución. No es solución. Así que la realidad es que llamamos al presidente que regrese a su sentido común original, una política humana, una política que actualmente puede proteger la frontera, pero también preserva el derecho de asilo en este país. With that, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you so much. Gracias, and thank you so much, Senator Menendez, for your leadership on this issue. And we're so grateful that this is a bicameral effort. Thank you so much to all of our colleagues here in the House and the Senate. This is what makes us different, is that, this is what makes us different, is that, thank you so much, is that we are willing to hold administrations accountable for the rights of immigrants and immigrant families, regardless of party or allegiance. Right is right, and our main allegiance is to the families, immigrant and U.S. citizen families of the United States. So thank you to our co-leads here, Senators Menendez, Padilla, Lujan, and Booker, and Representatives Casar and Grijalva for co-leading on this, as well as our members here joining as 77 members total of the House and Senate, additionally who have signed on to our letter, up to 80, as Senator Menendez had indicated. Last year, President Biden promised to end Title 42. Instead, he is now expanding restrictions on asylum seekers. But the right to seek asylum is enshrined in domestic and international law. And the United States is a shining example. And we have sought and aspired to be an example to uphold international law. Instead, this administration is making it effectively impossible to seek refuge at our border. The courts rightly rejected the Trump administration's attempt to categorically end asylum. President Biden should listen to the courts and human rights activists and reverse course. There can be no confusing the Biden administration's immigration policy with the Trump administration's, but doing better than Trump doesn't mean it shouldn't be the bar. Thousands of lives are being put in real danger every day. There have been more than 10,000 violent attacks on people at our border, including kidnappings, serious assaults, and deaths against individuals who were expelled due to Title 42 since the beginning of the Biden administration. The Biden administration's new policies only make it more difficult for the most vulnerable to legally access the United States. We are confident that there is a better way forward. And this is a sentiment not just held by progressive members, but by 77 Democrats in the House and Senate across the ideological spectrum. We are ready to work with the president to ensure that we have a safe, humane border that upholds the right to asylum without recreating unjust policies of past administrations. And with that, I'll hand it off to Senator Booker. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It is incredible to stand here with colleagues from the House and the Senate to stand for American values. We are a country that does not adhere to our values only when it's convenient, whether it's freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the fundamental values that distinguish us as a light unto all nations for what great democracies are and who great people can be. We know our history. We are at our best when times are tough, that we don't abandon our common values, but we adhere to them more strongly. And yes, we have dark chapters, like when the St. Louis, during the Holocaust, sailed to our shores and was turned around, where folks were sent back to those horrors and many died. It was coming out of that history that we as a nation affirmed that our values, our ideals, our virtue would be made real in law, codified by our government, that we would say never again. And yet here we are now, when there is a global migration crisis, where we are seeing political persecution, religious violence, all across our planet driving a migration crisis. At a time in human history that calls for us as Americans, to be a light and a beacon for how to address these global challenges, we are seeing the extension of Title 42 that ultimately is putting people in crisis and in danger, facing persecution and violence, back into those situations. I have been to the border. I have crossed and met with women escaping persecution who tried to legally present themselves for asylum and were turned away, and they are living a nightmare where they literally have to hide themselves to avoid sexual violence, robbery, and more, or being forced to consider to try to break American laws and enter illegally. This is the time in our country where we should be setting an example for humanity, where we should be adhering to our values, where we should be, as the prophet from the Old Testament says, a light unto nations. I am proud to stand with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for our values, for our common virtues, for the law. We can do better. We must do better. This is a time that calls to both conscience, it calls to leadership, and it calls to the heart of our country. I'm very proud to bring up right now a new colleague, Representative Greg Casar. Thank you.
Good morning, buenos dias. I'm so thankful and honored to be able to join my colleagues here and in the Congress. I'm Greg Casar, representing the 35th District of Texas, which stretches from East Austin down into the heart of San Antonio. I want to take us back to June 27th, 2022. 53 people were found dead in the back of a tractor trailer. 53 fathers, mothers, grandmothers, children as young as 13 years old, scorched to death in the scorching Texas heat. An absolute tragedy. Governor Abbott, the governor of my state, on that day, June 27th, put out a public statement. His public statement did not include remorse. It did not include honoring the dead or prayers for the few that survived and were struggling in the hospital. His words, and I quote, were, "These deaths are on Biden." Those words unmask a fundamental and disturbing truth about American politics today. The extreme right wing and those running for coward-in-chief do not care about solving our immigration challenges. Those bodies to them were not a human tragedy. They were an opportunity to go on Fox News and talk about the president. That's a horrifying truth that is critical for us to understand today. When I went to Reynosa just weeks ago and was standing in tents and in the dirt with mothers and children that have been turned away by Title 42, I, just like my colleagues and the vast majority of the American people, see a humanitarian crisis and a public policy challenge. But the extreme right wing see it as a political opportunity. When my community in San Antonio is trying to help people fleeing extreme violence and disaster, a Western Hemispheric displacement crisis, when there's people sleeping on the streets of El Paso, we see a challenge to be solved. But we know that for the extreme right wing, it is an opportunity to tweet and to try to run for president. And so that brings us to this letter today and to our joint advocacy today. Because the expansion of Title 42 and the transit ban will not solve this humanitarian crisis. We're already getting reports from my community and other communities in Texas that it's resulting in fewer people coming through the orderly process of seeking asylum at the port of entry. But those folks that are fleeing disaster, that are spending night after night on the top of trains, crossing hundreds or thousands of miles, fleeing for their lives, will now be forced to risk drowning in the river, to risk crossing the desert, or to get in the back of a tractor trailer. It will not solve the humanitarian crisis. This decision has been driven by the politics of the extreme right wing and their media allies. That's the fundamental truth. But this will not solve that political challenge either. Because, as Governor Abbott so cravenly showed, whether you come alive or whether you are tragically dead, if there is a single immigrant searching for a better life in this country, those cowards will use it as a political opportunity, and the political attacks simply will not stop. Whether people are presenting themselves at ports of entry, whether they're in El Paso or they're in Laredo, whether they're coming and building a better life and making our state greater in places like San Antonio or Austin, if there is a single immigrant searching for a better life, the most cynical people searching for political power will continue their attacks. But there is a solution that people of conscience, Democrats, and anybody across the aisle that wants to work with us can bring forward that would solve the humanitarian crisis and address the politics, which means finally fixing our broken immigration system. Representative Ocasio-Cortez and I have not been alive. We were born after the last time this Congress and the president came up with real solutions and real pathways to bring people here in an orderly, safe, and legal manner to continue to construct and support this amazing country. Because people like my grandmother could come back and forth to safety to Texas and back to Mexico and back to Texas, we have members of Congress, we have doctors, we have teachers, we have a growing economy. We can solve this challenge, but we have to ignore the cynics and do the work of solving the humanitarian crisis and taking this political chip off the table.
Amen.
Thank you guys so very much.
Thank you, Congressman. I don't see Congresswoman Barragan. Is she here? She's not yet. So our colleague, Senator Markey of Massachusetts.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was alive when the last bill passed. I was a friend of Senator Simpson. I was a friend of Congressman Mazzoli. They came across the aisle they came across the chambers to work together to find a comprehensive immigration policy. And they did so consistent with the values of our country and the understanding that immigration is what makes our country great. It is what has made our country great. And it reflects the history of the United States, understanding that you cannot make America great again by making America hate again. And that's what Title 42 is all about. It's a complete and total repudiation of who we have been as a nation for the entirety of our history. And I want to thank Senator Menendez and Booker, my friend Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you, Representative Casar, for your leadership. We're here today because we expect more from the Biden administration than we did from the Trump administration. Donald Trump spearheaded a campaign to implement inhumane and immoral immigration policies which Republicans supported and which has dramatically damaged our immigration system. This campaign of xenophobia, racism, and terror, coupled with Republican obstruction of all Democratic efforts to modernize our immigration system, have left us facing unprecedented challenges at the southern border. Title 42, the public health law that President Trump cynically used and exploited as an anti-immigrant weapon of mass expulsion, is exacerbating these challenges. There never was and certainly no longer is any justification for the use of Title 42 at our southern border. So I am extremely dismayed and disappointed by the Biden administration's decision to expand its use. It's long past time to stop using public health as a pretext for stopping immigrants at the border and turning them away. A few weeks ago, President Biden said, "I don't like Title 42. Well, Mr. President, we don't like it either. And your administration should be trying to end it and not to expand its use. The solution to the problems at our border is neither an expansion of Title 42 nor the new limits the Biden administration proposes on the longstanding right to seek asylum at our border. We urge the Biden administration to scrap its plans for a new asylum transit rule, one that will effectively resurrect the terrible Trump transit ban, barring people from asylum if they entered the United States without authorization or if they fail to seek asylum protections in their countries of transit. An asylum transit ban would be illegal and it would be immoral. We must respect international law and our nation's historical commitment to offering protection in the United States to those who have none at home. Mr. President, we expect better, we demand better, and we're going to continue to work as hard as we can to ensure that we put a humane policy on the books. Let me now turn and introduce my great colleague, Representative Schakowsky from Illinois. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Hsu. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'm Congressmember Judy Chu. My district includes Monterey Park, California. And while our community recovers from the shooting this weekend, there is another issue of justice, and that is the right to seek asylum at our borders. We all know that it's been decades since Congress has passed any comprehensive legislation on immigration. And the issues facing our nation today are drastically different from what is reflected in our current policies. Understanding this, I know that the Biden administration has limited tools to address the real forced global migration crises we're facing. I applaud the administration for using creative tools on hand to expand legal pathways for some in need. However, the expansion of some pathways must not come at the cost of access to asylum for others. To that end, I'm deeply alarmed by the administration's decision to expand harmful Trump-era policies like the cruel Title 42 border policy. It's responsible for sending thousands of asylum seekers back to dangerous situations where they faced assault, rape, and even murder. In addition, Title 42 contributes to the growing problems of xenophobia and anti-immigrant violence by painting those crossing the border as uniquely dangerous compared to other travelers. I'm also concerned with the proposal to revive the unlawful Trump asylum ban, which would block asylum automatically unless individuals first apply in the countries that they traveled through. Together, these actions will dramatically limit the legal rights of immigrants seeking protection at the southern border and betray our country's commitment to ensuring fundamental human rights of those seeking relief here. Instead of furthering a narrative that we should fear those crossing our border and subject asylum seekers to dangerous conditions, we should be prioritizing the health and safety of those seeking asylum here. I also urge the Biden administration to extend DED status to those who are from Hong Kong and stood up for democracy. Sending them back would send them to most certain imprisonment and death. And meanwhile, I also urge the Biden administration to remain committed to establishing a humane and orderly immigration agenda that respects human rights, human dignity, and international law. And now I turn it over to my incredible colleague who's been so outspoken on immigration issues, Congressmember Yvette Clarke. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
No, that's okay. We got a little out of order.
Okay. My incredible colleague, Congressmember Jan Schakowsky.
Okay. All incredible. The United States of America is a nation of immigrants. How many times have we said that? How many times has everybody said that to define our country? And generally, that is said with a certain kind of pride, because everyone here, except for Native Americans, at one point came to the United States of America. I am a first-generation American. Neither of my parents was born in the United States. Both of them came with their parents as small children from Russia, fleeing the persecution against Jews in the last century, and have found a home and thrived in the United States of America. This is our country. But we define our country as a welcoming place for people. I live in a community, the district that I represent in Chicago, the 6th Congressional District, in many ways is a beacon for immigrants. We have people that come from all over the world. The high school that I went to years ago had a book just written about it called Refugee High. And programs are developed to welcome and to help integrate the students from all over the world. And here we are today, watching this humanitarian crisis at the border, one that doesn't need to happen. We are better than that because we can develop an immigration system. We certainly can make sure that the right to asylum, which is the law of the land, which is also international law, is abided by. We can absolutely figure this out in a way much better than Title 42 that says, no, you can't come here. You have to go back. Or, you know, we aren't going to allow you to even apply for asylum as legal as it is in the United States. So I join my colleagues today who have been so eloquent in their reasons why Title 42, the President of the United States ought to go back to his original commitment that said Title 42, which he has said is not a good policy, should be removed. And so I'm happy to join all my colleagues in asking the President of the United States to reconsider, to change that. We can do this. Thank you.
Good morning to my colleagues, members of the press, and the advocates and activists that are here today. I want to thank Senators Menendez, Cory Booker, my colleague from New York, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Greg Casar for inviting me to speak with you here today. For those who don't know me, I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I proudly represent New York's 9th Congressional District in Central and South Brooklyn. And as a daughter of immigrants and a woman who has dedicated her life towards securing their fair and equitable access to the American dream, I have long pursued reform in a desperately out-of-date immigration system. In the 1950s, my parents migrated to this country from the beautiful island nation of Jamaica. My mother, Dr. Una S.T. Clarke, became the first foreign-born woman elected to New York's City Council. She migrated to this country looking for a better life and accessing education as a foreign student, inspired by the promise of prosperity and comfort that comes from achieving the American dream. And just like my mother, people across the globe seek to come to our nation, many of them seeking safety and asylum from fear, political violence, intimidation, famine. Just like my mother, these people can contribute greatness to this nation of immigrants, and they should be able to. Because the right to seek asylum is a legal human right, while I applaud the Biden administration for creating new legal pathways for Haitians, Cubans, Nicaraguans, I stand before you today urging this administration to reverse course on Title 42 and the proposed asylum transit ban. It is a harmful policy that disproportionately affects Black immigrants, immigrants of color, and creates life-threatening conditions for immigrants seeking refuge at our borders. As Americans, we have a moral imperative to help asylum seekers. It is in our DNA. It is our history. It is in our blood. It is part of the great fabric that combines this nation, making it the greatest nation on the planet. Ending Title 42 will signal the beginning of our national commitment to compassionately and safely welcome new Americans to our country. So let me be clear. Our nation owes these communities more than the apologies and empty words they are so tragically accustomed to. I want to speak particularly on behalf of the Haitian people, who were disproportionately and vastly victimized under its cruelty. They deserve our promise for a better, more accepting, and more loving future. And I intend to keep that promise. So let's expand legal pathways for migrants and refugees to this country without further dismantling the right to seek asylum at our border. Let us right the wrongs of the other side of the aisle and show the world once again why we are the greatest nation on the planet. Let us show the world how being a nation of immigrants makes us great. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm proud to stand next to my colleagues and advocate in pursuit of a more equitable and fair future for every individual looking towards America's shores. So everyone stay safe and stay healthy. Have a great day. Okay, I'm trying to get out of here. And bring up my next colleague, the Honorable Cory Bush of Missouri.
Right. Good morning. First, I want to say I'm glad to be able to be here alongside my fellow members of Congress on both sides, from both the House and the Senate, and from the leadership of Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Representative Casar, being here in demanding a humane and equitable immigration system. Let me be clear, and it's not the first time. Title 42 and the asylum transit ban are unconscionable and will result in the continuation of life-threatening harm to vulnerable migrant communities and Haitian nationals in particular. The parole program should not have come at the cost of perpetuating anti-Black xenophobic policies. These policies are cruel. They're cruel substitutes for genuine reform. They fly in the face of the rule of law. Title 42 is intended to be a public health tool. That's what we're told. Does anybody seriously believe the administration is doing this to prevent COVID-19? It's a stopgap measure kept in place by far-right judges and expanded under this administration that denies the right to asylum by failing to address the underlying structural problems with our immigration system. And the asylum transit ban was repeatedly struck down as unconstitutional during the Trump administration. Why would this administration double down on this illegal and inhumane policy? How can it not see that the costs far outweigh any perceived benefits? Across the country, we see in Texas, Missouri, and other Republican states bringing a lawsuit targeting the parole program. They're not interested in fairness, not interested in balance. For these Republicans, cruelty is the point. And if they succeed in blocking the parole program, all the administration will have accomplished is the revival and the expansion of racist and harmful policies. I call them the merciless GOP. There's nothing moderate about being cruel to people because they don't have the same passport we do, or deciding their suffering is not as worthy as the suffering of people from another country. It's not just extreme and immoral. It's bad policy, and it doesn't move us any closer to solving the underlying problems in our immigration system. We can do better than this. We can do better than all three branches of the government, the federal government, utterly failing to establish a truly equitable, a truly humane immigration system. We can do better than treating people fleeing persecution like expendable pawns in a political game. We can do better. We can do better than Title 42 and the asylum transit ban. We can respect the dignity of immigrants. We can recognize the complicity of our government in the conditions that are forcing people to flee the countries that they love. We can begin to address this sordid history of espousing an immigration policy rooted in love and solidarity. What is that? We can enact the many legislative and executive proposals that my colleagues and I have been advocating for to address structural problems. We can build a safe, we can build a fair and orderly and just immigration system that all of us can be proud of. I look forward to working alongside my colleagues in the extraordinary immigrants' rights community to build this system together. Thank you. And now I'll turn it back over to my sister in service, Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you. Cory brought it home. We'll just take one or two brief questions with respect to the topic at hand. We'll start here.
Hi, just a really quick question. What are top congressional leaders like Schumer, Jeffries, are they signing on to this bill you're proposing, or letter just kind of asking Biden to reverse it?
Yeah, so this is something that the letter, I believe, is, I'm not sure if it's closed to signatories yet, it just closed, but this is something that we've been in active conversation with Democratic leadership. And I also want to add that this goes beyond just congressional leadership. We have governors in states across the country, including here in New York with Governor Kathy Hochul saying expand these legal pathways, make it easier for these folks to get work authorizations. Here in New York, we are ready to put people to work. We just need the administration to help us expand those pathways to let them do that. We can do this, and we can do this together. Thank you.
So many immigration experts that I've spoken with have said, and I'm sure you all would agree, that the asylum system
You know, I think there's a couple of things. There's the regulatory issues that we have, and there's statutory issues. Right now, there are regulatory regimes in place that extend these backlogs and make them longer than necessary, these 180-day wait periods, for example. But also, when we look at our work here in Congress, we devote so many resources to places in DHS that are very focused on enforcement, and not enough resources in places like USCIS to ensure that we can process these backlogs. So there's things that we can do here, and I believe that there's regulatory changes. And one last question.
Is there anything that Congress can do to force the administration's hand on this? And to Congressman Bush's point on this, those Republican-led lawsuits in 20-plus states now, are you worried that your positions are going to make it really hard for the administration to compromise or win on this?
Well, you know, sorry, let me start with your first question. And your first question was, could you repeat that?
If Congress can do anything to force the administration's hand?
Well, you know, I think there's a couple of things. We have some wonderful new members of the House that may be joining the Oversight Committee with Representative Casar, and as well as Cory Bush's excellent work, Yvette Clarke's excellent work in oversight through the process of sending letters to the administration. I think that one of the things that we can do, whether it's the Trump administration or the Biden administration conducting very strong oversight of the conduct of DHS, there still is a lot of outstanding questions that they have to answer. Congress does have the power of the purse, and while Republicans have control, have the majority right now, we also have a Senate majority. Democrats have a Senate majority, and I believe that we can be using our allocation of resources to not just push back against the administration, but to open these paths to citizenship and make it easier to process. Thank you.